That was 5 years ago, and they turned out to be the best 5 years of my life since my husband died. I recovered completely from my hip surgery and moved back home. But I also made changes that gave me freedom I'd never experienced before. I sold the big house on Elmwood Street to Sarah immediately, at below market value, and bought a beautiful condominium in a luxury senior community. The money I'd planned to leave her went into a trust fund for her children's education instead. Watching her family thrive in the home where I'd raised Richard was worth more than any inheritance. With my financial future secured, I finally started living for myself, instead of living for people who saw me as an obligation. I traveled to Europe, took art classes, joined book clubs, even learned competitive bridge. Richard and Vanessa never knew about the will change. They continued their dutiful visits, bringing flowers and fake smiles, counting down the days until their inheritance would solve all their financial problems. I played my part too, letting them think I was gradually becoming more confused and dependent. When I died peacefully in my sleep last month at 83, they rushed to Harold Davidson's office expecting to claim their prize. The reading of the will was apparently quite a show, though I wasn't there to see their faces when they learned that the old burden had the last laugh after all. Harold told me later that Richard broke down completely when he read my letter, finally understanding what his greed had cost him. Vanessa stormed out screaming about challenging the will, but the poison pill clause made that impossible. They got exactly what they'd given me. Nothing but disappointment. You know what I learned in my final years? The people who call you a burden usually turn out to be the biggest burdens themselves. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love, respect, and treating each other with dignity every human being deserves. Have you ever been written off by family members who saw you as an inconvenience rather than a person? Have you ever overheard conversations that revealed what people really thought about you? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story inspired you to value yourself enough to make hard decisions about toxic family relationships, hit that subscribe button. My grandma Beaumont and my daughter-in-law said, "She's just a burden." So I rewrote my will that same night from the nursing home. Chapter 1. The Direct Hook. Plus entry CTA. My daughter-in-law thought I was asleep when she told my son, "At least when this old burden finally dies, we can start living our real life." I was lying in that nursing home bed, eyes closed, listening to every cruel word they whispered about me just 3 feet away. That same night, I called my lawyer and made sure they'd never see a penny of the $2.3 million they were already spending in their heads. If you've ever been underestimated because people thought age made you weak or stupid, settle in with your coffee, because this story's got more twists than a pretzel factory. I'm Eleanor Thompson, and at 78 years old, I've learned that sometimes the best revenge is the kind that comes with legal documentation and a lawyer's signature. You see, I'd been in Sunset Manor for 6 weeks recovering from hip surgery, and apparently my son Richard and his wife Vanessa thought that made me deaf, dumb, and ready for the grave. They'd visit twice a week, bringing flowers and fake smiles, talking to me like I was a confused child who couldn't understand basic conversation anymore. Each visit felt like a performance where I was the unwilling audience to their charity act. What they didn't know was that my mind was sharper than ever, even if my body needed some time to heal. I'd spent 42 years teaching high school English, and you don't survive 4 decades of teenagers without learning how to read people like open books. Every fake smile, every impatient sigh, every meaningful glance between them when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I caught it all and filed it away for future reference. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in March. They'd come for their usual duty visit, bringing grocery store carnations and updates about their lives that they assumed I was too confused to remember or too senile to understand. I could see Vanessa checking her phone, counting the minutes until she could leave and get back to her real life. But when she thought I'd drifted off to sleep, she finally said what she'd been thinking for months. If you enjoy stories about people who underestimate little old ladies and live to regret it, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I've got 78 years of experience watching people show their true colors when they think nobody's keeping score. And trust me, the lessons I've learned are worth sharing. That Tuesday night was the last time anyone in my family would mistake Eleanor Thompson for a helpless old woman. By morning, I'd set in motion a plan that would teach them the most expensive lesson about respect they'd ever receive. Some people have to learn the hard way that age brings wisdom, not weakness, and I was about to become their teacher. Richard had been my pride and joy for 52 years. The baby I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights after his father died in Vietnam. I raised him alone on a teacher's salary, working summers and weekends to make sure he had everything he needed to succeed. College tuition, graduate school, the down payment on his first house. I never hesitated to help my boy build the life he deserved. When he brought Vanessa home 8 years ago, I tried so hard to love her for his sake. She was beautiful, energetic, and made Richard laugh in ways I hadn't seen since he was a child. She worked as a personal trainer and had big dreams about opening her own fitness studio someday. I supported those dreams, even invested $20,000 to help her get started. But somewhere along the way, I started noticing things. The way Vanessa's eyes would light up when she talked about inheriting my house. How she'd walk through my rooms touching my antiques like she was already planning where to put them in storage. The subtle comments about how I was getting older and might need more help than I was admitting to myself. Still, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. The suspicions of an old woman who'd been alone too long. Richard seemed happy, and that's all I'd ever wanted for my son. When they got married 3 years ago, I gave them a generous wedding gift and welcomed Vanessa into our family with an open heart. The changes started small. Fewer phone calls, shorter visits, that tight smile Vanessa wore whenever I offered advice or tried to share stories about Richard's childhood. They'd exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking, and Richard started saying things like, "Mom, you don't need to worry about that," whenever I mentioned my finances or estate planning. Then came the hip surgery, and suddenly I wasn't Eleanor Thompson anymore. I was a problem to be managed. The way they discussed my medical care, my recovery timeline, my options for the future, like I wasn't sitting right there in the hospital bed listening to every word. They'd already decided I was too frail to live alone anymore, too confused to make my own decisions. What hurt most was seeing how easily Richard went along with it. The son I'd sacrificed everything to raise had turned into a man who saw his mother as an inconvenience, a burden he was obligated to carry until nature relieved him of the responsibility. When the doctor suggested a short stay at Sunset Manor for physical therapy, they jumped on it like it was a permanent solution to their problem. Looking back now, I can see they were already planning my future without me. The hushed conversations about what would be best, the way they'd cut me off when I tried to participate in decisions about my own life. They thought 6 weeks in a nursing home would break whatever spirit I had left, make me grateful for whatever scraps of attention they chose to give me. The first sign of their true feelings came during my second week at Sunset Manor. I was doing well in physical therapy, walking with a walker and making progress every day. But when Richard and Vanessa visited, they acted like I was at death's door. They spoke about me in third person, even when I was sitting right there in the conversation. "How is she doing?" Vanessa would ask the nurses, like I couldn't speak for myself. "Is she eating okay? Does she seem confused about where she is?" Confused. Like being 78 and recovering from surgery automatically meant I'd lost my mind along with my mobility. But the real hurt started when I overheard them talking to my doctor in the hallway. I'd been napping and woke up to use the bathroom when I heard Richard's voice outside my door. "We're really concerned about her living alone after this. She's been forgetting things, getting confused about her medications. Maybe it would be better if she stayed here permanently, forgetting things, getting confused." None of that was true, but it sounded so believable coming from a concerned son who just wanted what was best for his aging mother. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to them paint me as a helpless old woman who couldn't be trusted to take care of herself anymore. The worst part was how reasonable they made it sound, how much safer I'd be with professional care, how much less worry it would be for them knowing I was being looked after properly. They were rewriting the story of my life, turning me from an independent woman recovering from surgery into a confused elderly patient who needed to be managed for her own good. That's when I started paying closer attention to everything they said and did during their visits. The way Vanessa would look around my room like she was calculating how quickly they could clear out my belongings. How Richard would ask leading questions about my comfort level and whether I felt capable of handling my own affairs anymore. They'd started treating me like a child who needed protection from reality, speaking in those soft, patronizing voices people use with dementia patients. "Don't worry about your bills, Mom. Richard and I will take care of everything." Taking care of everything meant taking control of everything, including the bank accounts and investment portfolios they assumed I was too old to understand. The breaking point came when I caught them going through my purse while I was in the bathroom. Vanessa had my checkbook out, flipping through the register like she was reviewing my spending habits. When I asked what she was doing, she smiled that sweet fake smile and said, "Just making sure you're not missing any important payments, Eleanor. We want to help you stay organized." Stay organized. Like I hadn't been managing my own finances successfully for 6 decades. Like the woman who'd raised a child alone and built a comfortable retirement fund through careful planning and smart investments, suddenly couldn't be trusted with her own checkbook. That night, I lay in my narrow nursing home bed and realized that my son and his wife weren't visiting out of love or concern. They were conducting surveillance, gathering evidence to prove I was incompetent, building a case for why they needed to take over my life completely. And once they had control, there would be no going back to the independence I'd fought so hard to maintain. The conversation that destroyed any remaining illusions happened on that Tuesday evening in March. Richard and Vanessa had come for their usual visit, bringing the same grocery store flowers and the same fake cheerfulness they'd been performing for weeks. I was tired from physical therapy and had dozed off while they were talking quietly near the window. At least, that's what they thought. In reality, I was lying there with my eyes closed, listening to every word they whispered about me and my future. What I heard made my blood run cold, and my heart break simultaneously. The social worker thinks she could probably go home in another 2 weeks if she keeps improving, Richard was saying, his voice heavy with disappointment. But honestly, I don't think she's ready. Did you see how confused she got yesterday when I asked about her insurance paperwork? I hadn't been confused about anything. I'd been annoyed that he was trying to handle my personal business without asking permission first, but apparently any resistance to their interference was now evidence of mental decline. "Richard, we need to be realistic about this," Vanessa replied in that sugar-sweet tone she used when she was about to say something particularly cruel. "Your mother is 78 years old. She had a bad fall. She's been living alone in that big house for years. And honestly, she's not getting any younger or sharper. Not getting any sharper. I'd been managing my own finances, maintaining my own household, and living independently just fine until I'd slipped on some ice in my driveway. But according to Vanessa, one accident meant I was ready for permanent institutionalization. I know. Richard sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "I just hate the idea of forcing her into anything. She's always been so independent." "That's exactly the problem," Vanessa shot back, her voice getting more animated. "She thinks she's still capable of living alone, making her own decisions, controlling all that money. But look where we are, Richard. She's in a nursing home because she couldn't even walk from her car to her front door safely. All that money. There it was, the real heart of their concern. Not my safety, not my happiness, but the $2.3 million I'd accumulated through 40 years of careful saving and smart investments. At least when this old burden finally dies, we can start living our real life," Vanessa continued, her voice dropping to what she thought was a whisper. "Do you know what we could do with that house and all her investments? We could pay off our mortgage, expand my studio, maybe even buy that vacation property in Florida we've been talking about." The silence that followed was deafening. I waited for Richard to defend me, to tell his wife that talking about his mother that way was unacceptable. Instead, I heard him let out a long, slow breath. "I just wish there was an easier way to handle all this," he said quietly. "The guilt is killing me, but you're right. We can't keep putting our lives on hold indefinitely." They stayed for another hour after that devastating conversation, making small talk and pretending to care about my recovery while I pretended to sleep. Every word they spoke felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship, but I kept my breathing steady and my eyes closed, storing up every detail for future reference. When they finally left, kissing my forehead and promising to visit again soon, I waited a full 10 minutes before opening my eyes. The night nurse, Sarah, was making her rounds, and she could tell immediately that something was wrong. "Mrs. Thompson, are you feeling all right? You look upset." Sarah had been my favorite nurse since I'd arrived, a kind young woman who actually listened when I spoke, instead of talking over me like I was a confused child. "Sarah, I need to ask you a favor," I said quietly, making sure no one else was within earshot. "Could you help me make a phone call? It's important, and I need some privacy." She glanced around the hallway, then pulled my door almost closed. "Of course. What do you need?" I gave her the number for Davidson and Associates, the law firm that had handled my estate planning for the past 15 years. "I need to speak with Harold Davidson," Tell him it's Eleanor Thompson, and that I need him to come here tonight, as soon as possible. Tell him it's urgent." Sarah looked concerned, but didn't ask questions. She made the call from her station, speaking quietly to someone at the law office. When she came back, she had good news. "Mr. Davidson is working late tonight, and he said he can be here within the hour. He'll meet you in the small conference room down the hall." The next hour passed like a century. I used the time to organize my thoughts, to make sure I knew exactly what I wanted to say and do. Harold Davidson had been Margaret Richardson's lawyer before she became Margaret Davidson, and he'd been handling my legal affairs since I'd inherited a small fortune from an aunt 20 years ago. When Harold arrived, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing the same concerned expression he'd had when he'd helped me navigate my husband's death benefits all those years ago, I knew I could trust him with what I was about to request. "Eleanor, what's this about?" Sarah said it was urgent. He sat down across from me in the small conference room, and I noticed how carefully he studied my face, probably trying to assess my mental state. "Harold, I need to completely rewrite my will tonight, and I need you to document everything carefully, because I have a feeling someone's going to challenge this when the time comes." For the next 2 hours, we worked through every detail of my estate. The house on Elmwood Street that Richard and Vanessa had been eyeing like vultures. The investment accounts they assumed would be their retirement fund. The savings accounts. The insurance policies. The antique furniture they'd already discussed selling. All of it was going somewhere else now. All of it was going to people who had shown me kindness, respect, and genuine care, instead of greed and manipulation. The new will we drafted that night was a masterpiece of legal precision and poetic justice. Harold worked with his usual thoroughness, making sure every clause was ironclad and every intention was crystal clear. By the time we finished, it was almost midnight, but I felt more awake and energized than I had since my surgery. The house on Elmwood Street, worth approximately $400,000, would go to Sarah, the night nurse who had shown me more genuine kindness in 6 weeks than my own family had in 6 months. She'd been working double shifts to support her 2 young children after her husband left, and she deserved a break that would change her family's life forever. The bulk of my investment portfolio, nearly $1.8 million, was being divided between 3 charities: the local animal shelter where I'd volunteered for years, the literacy foundation that provided books to underprivileged children, and a scholarship fund at the community college where I'd taught continuing education classes after retirement. My antique furniture, the pieces that Vanessa had been mentally cataloging and appraising during every visit, would go to the Historical Society. Let them preserve the family heirlooms for people who would appreciate their history instead of just their resale value. Richard would receive exactly $1 and a sealed letter explaining why. The letter I dictated to Harold was perhaps the most difficult thing I'd ever had to write, but also the most necessary. "To my son Richard," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are learning that actions have consequences even after death. The woman you called a burden, the mother you wrote off as confused and incompetent, was listening every word you said about her in that nursing home room." I went on to detail everything I'd overheard, every cruel comment and calculating conversation. I explained how their behavior had broken my heart and destroyed the relationship we'd spent 52 years building. Most importantly, I made it clear that this wasn't a decision made in anger or confusion, but a rational response to their demonstrated character. Vanessa got nothing, not even the $1 I was leaving Richard, but she got her own letter, shorter, but no less devastating. "To Vanessa, you called me a burden, and you were right. I was a burden, on your conscience, on your greed, and on your plan to profit from my death. Now that burden is lifted. You're free to live your real life, just as you wanted, but you'll do it without a penny of my money." Harold reviewed everything twice, making sure there were no loopholes or ambiguities that could be exploited in probate court. He arranged for 2 nurses to witness my signature, and we had everything notarized right there in the conference room. By 1 a.m., Eleanor Thompson's new last will and testament was legally binding and properly filed. The most satisfying part was the clause Harold suggested about challenging the will. Anyone who contested the document would automatically forfeit any claim to my estate, and would be responsible for all legal fees incurred during the challenge. It was a poison pill that would make any attempt to overturn my wishes prohibitively expensive, and ultimately futile. As I lay in my narrow nursing home bed that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The burden of family loyalty that had been weighing me down was finally lifted. I was free to live whatever time I had left on my own terms, without worrying about ungrateful children spending my hard-earned money before I was even cold in the ground. That was 5 years ago, and they turned out to be the best 5 years of my life since my husband died. I recovered completely from my hip surgery and moved back home, but I also made some changes that gave me a freedom I'd never experienced before. I sold the big house on Elmwood Street to Sarah immediately, at a price well below market value, and used the proceeds to buy a beautiful condominium in a luxury senior community. The money I'd planned to leave her went into a trust fund for her children's education instead. Watching her family thrive in the home where I'd raised Richard was worth more than any inheritance I could have left behind. With my financial future secured and my estate planning complete, I finally started living for myself instead of living for people who saw me as an obligation. I traveled to Europe, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt I could afford. I took art classes, joined book clubs, even learned to play bridge at a competitive level. Richard and Vanessa never knew about the will change. They continued their dutiful visits, bringing flowers and fake smiles, counting down the days until their inheritance would solve all their financial problems. I played my part too, letting them think I was gradually becoming more confused and dependent, making their eventual windfall feel like a reward for their patience and sacrifice. When I died peacefully in my sleep last month at 83, they rushed to Harold Davidson's office expecting to claim their prize. The reading of the will was apparently quite a show, though I wasn't there to see their faces when they learned that the old burden had the last laugh after all. Harold told me later that Richard broke down completely when he read my letter, finally understanding what his greed and his wife's cruelty had cost him. Vanessa stormed out of the office, screaming about challenging the will, but the poison pill clause made that impossible. They got exactly what they'd given me, nothing but disappointment and broken promises. The real winners were the people who had treated an elderly woman with dignity and respect. Sarah's children will go to college debt-free. The animal shelter built a new wing. The Literacy Foundation is sending books to schools across 3 counties. And dozens of students are getting their education paid for by a woman they never met, but who believed in the power of learning to change lives. You know what I learned in my final years? The people who call you a burden usually turn out to be the biggest burdens themselves. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love, respect, and treating each other with the dignity every human being deserves, regardless of age or circumstance. Have you ever been written off by family members who saw you as an inconvenience rather than a person? Have you ever overheard conversations that revealed what people really thought about you when they assumed you couldn't hear? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes we all need to know that standing up for ourselves isn't selfish. It's necessary. And if this story inspired you to value yourself enough to make hard decisions about toxic family relationships, hit that subscribe button. I may be gone now, but my story lives on as proof that it's never too late to take control of your own narrative. Remember, age brings wisdom, not weakness, and the best revenge is living well and dying on your own terms.